Right, good afternoon. I think we're on for the next session that is again focused on ethical, clinical, and regulatory challenges in cell and gene therapies. As an introduction again, as I said this morning, I'm Kanwaljit Singh, Director of Pediatrics and Executive Director of International Neonatal Consortium. Now, somebody who's been really very interested in drug development in and for neonates, you might wonder, why am I talking about issues pertaining to cell and gene therapies? As it turns out that a lot of our stakeholders from industry and from academia have had a very long-standing interest in cell and gene therapies. The reason being, as the field matures, becomes more and more mainstream, which is actually going to happen, the trend has already been, and it'll actually accelerate that given the safety and efficacy consideration balancing, the trend is going to be earlier and earlier intervention for these cell and gene therapy interventions as is feasibly possible and as is feasible, going down as far as, a young age to neonates even. So because of that, our stakeholders have had a very long-standing interest in cell and gene therapy, plus some of the therapies that are being investigated for neonatal conditions like NAC, necrotizing enterocolitis, bronchopulmonary dysplasia, have had a long time standing, investigations on cellular therapies. Plus, then there's this consideration pertaining to newborn screening, where more and more states are actually already approving whole genome sequencing as a part of newborn screening. Because of that, INC very recently decided to start a work group focusing on cell and gene therapies, and where our focus is on investigating innovative trial designs, optimizing use of biomarkers, addressing long-term follow-up strategies, and any other issues that are going to be pertinent for the development of cell and gene therapy interventions in pediatric age range. So that's basically the reason why we are hosting this panel discussion today, from the consideration and perspective of International Neonatal Consortium and Pediatrics. And from here, I'm going to, give the stage to my co-moderator, who is Dr. Tom Miller, and he's going to talk a little bit about our cell and gene therapy workgroup.
Hi, everyone, and thanks to the organizing committee for the opportunity to share some perspectives and engage with a group of experts that have maybe a bit of a different lens from time to time, but very, very similar interests. And that is, of course, to get these exciting new therapies to children that can benefit from them considerably. And for the reasons that Kanwaljit had mentioned, there are a number of macro dynamics, tailwinds for the field, where for the first time, at least for me, that spent a good bit of my professional life thinking about drug development in children. It seems that we're on the front end of a renaissance, because many of the programs being developed in the ecosystem right now will not only include, but also in many cases prioritize children with oftentimes terrible diseases as the primary patient population of interest. So this now sets the stage for a whole new set of challenges for us, with a number of known unknowns, and what I suspect we'll learn along the way, a few unknowns as well. So we are, as INC and CPATH in general often does, we tend to take a multi-stakeholder approach towards tackling pre-competitive challenges that in some way, shape, or form we all wrestle with. So we're going to touch on a number of operational challenges that we see. We're going to touch on a number of ethical considerations that are not often easy to resolve it in a straightforward way. And hopefully we'll all learn a thing or two to take back to our respective teams as we continue to climb this hill. Before we jump in, can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, just green.
Green. I'm going to ask our colleagues that are joining on the stage to introduce themselves, and then we could jump into some fun questions. So please.
Hi, everybody. Lynne Yao. I'm the director of the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health in the Office of New Drugs in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at FDA.
I'm Amber Van Laar. I'm a neurologist, but also working at AskBio, a gene therapy company that's affiliated with Bayer, which we'll be talking about a bit more today. It's nice to be here.
I'm Paulla Dennis. I'm a senior director in a rare disease advanced therapies and pediatrics team at Fortrea. If you're not familiar with Fortrea, they are a CRO. But I started my career 25 years ago at Nationwide Children's Hospital and have been in rare peds my entire career, and cell and gene therapy about 15 years ago.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. I'm Nicole Verdun. I'm the Super Office Director in the Office of Therapeutic Products at FDA and the Center for Biologics, which is the office that regulates cell and gene therapy and tissue regulation. And I'm a pediatric hematologist oncologist by training.
Hi, everyone. Great to be at another CPAP conference. I'm Brian O'Neill. I am a Senior Director and Research Physician with Eli Lilly in our Pediatric Development Group. I'm a pediatrician and emergency medicine physician by training, and our group works across all of Lilly's portfolio, addressing pediatric requirements and pediatric study needs. That includes gene therapies as well.
Thank you.
So we just leave up.
Yeah, just leave it here and we can start with the discussion. I think, I'm going to start, and since Lynne, you're the first one in the list, and I'm going to ask you the first question, and basically, and similar question to Dr. Nicole Verdun too. But my question to you guys is, in your perspective, with your FDA hat on, with your pediatrics hat on, what do you think are, and in your experience, most critical ethical issues and challenges that your office faces or will is going to be facing as you deal with these cell and gene therapy interventions becoming more and more mainstream, and interventions targeting children, maybe even in cases where the disease hasn't yet manifested, but it's going to be coming up pretty soon, and you want to evaluate a clinical trial.
Yeah, thank you, Kanwaljit. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to turn the question on its head a little bit because I heard something that was very impactful to me earlier in the meeting about how challenges are really opportunities for innovation. And I do think that we're at this place right now, particularly with respect to cell and gene therapies and their application in pediatric diseases, that everything we've talked about in this conference has, where's Klaus, the whole connecting of the dots thing? I mean, we've talked about real world evidence. We've talked about use of AI. We've talked about endpoints and biomarkers, COAs, patient focused drug development. We've talked about, novel in vitro systems. All of the reason I bring that up is because, in adult drug development, I think you heard in the last session that we can rely on the 1,000-patient trial. Do we really necessarily need, an in vitro system to evaluate if we have already run the clinical trial? In children, that's, again, the opposite. We have ethical, we have feasibility issues that really we have dealt with for many years already, that have forced us to think about novel strategies to approach how we get these done in children. And that is going to be as important, or already is proven to be important, in the development of cell and gene therapies for children. I mean, I think Nicole can tell you better than I can, but if you look at the cell and gene therapies that have been approved already, and it's incredible the work that has been done in CBER to get these treatments to patients. It's impressive to know how many of those include children already. Whereas historically, we've lagged behind for 20 years before we get the products approved. So my point in saying that is, I think a lot of the challenges that we're talking about, developmental changes, small populations, ethical considerations, these are things that we have already begun to deal with in other aspects of therapeutics or device development, and I think are really tailor-made to help us move forward with cell and gene therapies from the start.
So basically you're saying it's not quite different from non-cell and gene therapy intervention that's being planned for pediatrics.
Yeah, and in fact,
basically
sorry to interrupt, but in fact, I think we've already leveraged some of those learnings because we see the fruits of the labor in cell and gene therapies already, that so many of them are already approved in pediatric populations or are intended for specific pediatric populations.
Yeah, great. And Nicole, same question to you with your CBER hat on. If you have anything extra or additional to add.
I mean, I agree with everything that Lynne said. I think we, at the FDA, we are afforded a wonderful opportunity with a strong, pediatric program and presence. And a lot of considerations have gone into the cell and gene therapy space in this regard. I think we've done a lot to progress the field, specifically in pediatrics and rare disease, where pediatrics is not the afterthought, it's the first thought. And I'm really excited about a lot of the changes that we have made, within our office to ensure that they are not the afterthought, that we're studying indications in pediatric patients early on in development. It had been a paradigm 10 years ago even, where we would compel sponsors to, well, study this in adults first and before we get to pediatrics. And we really have changed that mindset. I'm quite proud of a lot of our reviewers in that regard. And as we've grown in this past year, we've gone from essentially a single office to 6 offices, which is the super office. And with that come a lot of considerations and communication around this, aspects of this, including non-clinical. We now have a non-clinical pharmacology toxicology office, several CMC offices, our clinical office. And it really takes a lot of coordination, but I'm really proud of all of the work that we've done there. In the pharmacology toxicology space, that's another space where we've made a lot of headway, because we don't often understand a lot of the mechanism to the point where we're afforded the ability to have an animal model which can predict what we're going to see in pediatrics sometimes. And so we really have to think in innovative ways, and think a bit outside the box. And we partner a lot with Lynne's group as well in this regard. And so I really think we're at a great juncture in the field where we've made some significant headway. We have, as many of you know, a lot of activity in this space, but a lot of promise, and we are in a place where we're now seeing sponsors not be afraid to study things in pediatrics and even in quite small populations. I was on a meeting this morning where there's an incidence of about 20 in the United States, and we're studying a gene therapy for that. And so I really think it's an exciting time.
So the ecosystem, which has been very gratifying for me personally, has matured considerably in the last handful of decades, and really starting to understand approach towards neonatal and pediatric therapeutics development. I think as sponsors, we've learned a ton. My observation has been that thinking from health authorities around the globe has matured as well. Within FDA and specifically, how do you take advantage of that institutional knowledge that may not reside within CBER? How do we take advantage of all of the learnings that we've had along the way to make sure that we're in the best possible position to make a decision?
Yeah, so I mean, within FDA, we have a lot of opportunity for cross-center engagement and conversation. I was afforded the opportunity, I'd say, to serve in several different capacities within FDA. And so I was at Center for Drugs and Office of Blood and Biosimilars. But through a lot of those, you really meet a lot of people across the FDA. And so it's to answer your question, it's quite intentional. We do set up meetings, and we have, as many of you know, a rare disease hub that we're rolling out, which really does look at how we can leverage conversations and communication across centers, and leverage some of the things that you're talking about, like in terms of learning and opportunity, not just from CBER to CDER, CDER to CBER, the device space. And so I think to answer your question, it's just a very intentional thing that we do, and are quite conscious of it to ensure that we're moving the field forward, and that all of us are moving the field forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. This was not one of the questions I had in my mind, but since you actually mentioned it, Nicole, I would like you to talk a little bit more about the super office that you just mentioned, for the benefit of people who have gathered here and they know a little bit more about it.
Sure. So as I mentioned, just really quickly, we have grown quite a lot, but substantially in the past year, and now have 6 offices, including the offices that I mentioned. Specifically, we have a CMC office for cell therapy, a CMC office for gene therapy, a CMC office for plasma therapeutics. We have a large project management office, And then our Office of Clinical Evaluation, which has several physicians within that group, and then a policy group as well, and outreach. And so across that, as you can imagine, these are all new offices, and it's my remit as we're growing to make sure that we are communicating and that we're really advancing the field. And we've really been able to hire quite a few experts, and are actually it's almost at capacity in terms of what our resources are, which we're really excited about. So that's a lot of growth and a lot of change, but a lot of opportunity and a lot of excitement within the super office. And so we have a lot of communication and meetings across all of those offices to ensure that our decision making is consistent and clear. But that's essentially the structure of the super office for those that are not aware.
So we'll give our regulator colleagues a break to catch a sip of water, and we're going to transition to the folks that are operationalizing this exciting scientific platform. So maybe starting with you, Amber. As you've gleaned in many of the conversations, presumably over the last couple of days, there's quite a bit of interest in drug development for very young children within this ecosystem here. And I know through some of the great work that colleagues at AskBio are doing, many of the prioritized programs are focusing on monogenic congenital diseases. So starting to intervene perhaps very, very early in life. What keeps you up at night? What's on your wall of worry as you start to think about unique considerations for exposing very young children to these new medicines?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, this is there is definitely a list of things that keep me up at night, and a lot of it's been discussed, here already. Again, I think when it comes to gene therapy, especially, we are used to being first in a lot of ways. So I think, looking at a younger population, going to neonates, and this is kind of our wheelhouse. We're always building the plane as we're flying it. But one of the topics that I know it's been brought up several times in different groups here. So one of the big issues I'm worried about is monitoring. Like, how long am I monitoring these patients for? I think that it's hard enough in adults, but doing this in children with, potentially irreversible one-time procedure, I think that we need to, be thoughtful about it. And how do we want to do this, and what data do we want to get? And then on top of just the duration. So I think the monitoring is a big deal. I think there's some other ethical concerns. I know we've talked about some of them here as well. But I think one thing that's worrying me quite a bit right now is, if we have a disease that has several mutations that come along with it, but there's, it's already a rare disease, my microing it's down even further by looking at the specific mutation subtypes. And then how do I handle that from a data standpoint in the long run? So these are some other, big areas of concern. But I think another area that is pretty clear that's a problem still is education. Just basics of understanding gene therapy is a major hurdle. I mean, this affects, everything from recruitment to, just the overall duration of the study and what do we do afterwards. I think there's a desperate need for education, and it's not just, of patients and caregivers. This goes across the board. I think we just do not know enough about gene therapy to this day. And one other thing I'm going to put out there right now is, accessibility to these therapies. Should we be successful? This worries me, a good bit, especially when we're talking about young, vulnerable populations where there may be, scattered number across the globe. How do we do this, and how do we do it in a cost-effective way? This is, we're all struggling with it. But I do think we're in a new phase right now, and I think it's, this is the right place to start having these conversations.
So we're going to come back to the ethical topics in a bit, but before we jump off of this one, maybe continuing with Paulla, so with maybe a slightly different lens as an executive in a CRO, now in execution mode for a lot of these studies, what does your wall of worry look like?
Well, at 3 a.m., I sometimes wake up and have all kinds of fun thoughts. But going back to the ethical and the educational piece, for me, it's the concept of hope. And I think someone touched on this earlier, right? Oh, it's a rare disease. They have no other options. Of course, they want to participate. From my perspective, when I sit and I look at the patient journey, and one particular trial I'm involved in, it's neonates, newly diagnosed, life-threatening disorder where they could pass away within months. Parents are tremendously stressed out, and here we are presenting them with hope. And how do you benefit how do you weigh that risk for them? How do you explain? How do you know you're truly getting informed consent for a lifetime commitment? How does this child hopefully survive now, right? When they're 15 and they come to you and say, what did I get treated with? And what does it mean for me? You know, and we don't necessarily know the answer. So it's really around that benefit risk, but also playing to that stressful environment that the families are in, and making sure we do have the tools and we give them adequate time to prepare to be in the trial. And that as the children grow, we provide ongoing and adaptive learning for them and a conduit for them to ask questions, you know, so that they're always comfortable knowing what's going on inside their own body.
Yeah, and I just wanted to have a similar, though slightly different, I guess, type of a question for, for Brian. And basically that pertains to your perspective about long-term. Actually, let's do it in a slightly different way. First, I would probably ask you the question about, in a lot of cases in pediatric cell and gene therapy development, you might be faced with a situation where the intervention is necessary while the disease is still pre-symptomatic, which might be coming in, a little bit into the future. In that specific instance, how do you evaluate safety, efficacy, and ethical considerations and plus, added complexity of like 15-year long-term follow-up in that instance with your industry head on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as far as much more to add, I mean, I think with what Paul and Amber had voiced, I think that's certainly a lot of what keeps us up at night as well. I'm in close connection with the clinical research physician who's led some of the type 2 Gaucher's work within Prevail, which is a subsidiary of Lilly. And I think they've hit on those exact things, right? How long are we following these patients? How long are we monitoring? And education being a huge piece, especially when you're talking about in that pre-symptomatic space and taking that from a preclinical space and planning to operationalizing that. I will say in a different way, even, I think addressing some of those ethical complexities up front, not only from within the organization, but then taking that to operationalizing it as well, dealing with heterogeneity in phenotype, variable penetrance in some of these diseases we're looking at, and explaining that and make sure that's properly understood within our own organization, what that might mean for the therapy we're developing, especially when we're talking about systemic diseases that are hitting multiple different systems, and we could be developing multiple different routes of administration for addressing those, and considering those ethical challenges of which of those patient populations does the risk benefit support going into those. And I feel like from what I've had the most experience with in planning from that preclinical and before we're getting to operationalizing some of those things, those have been, I think, some of the really big challenges as we've been getting to strategize around some of these disease states.
Thank you.
So I made a comment in one of the earlier sessions as a reminder for some folks that might be new to INC or even the topic, that particularly for the rare and ultra rare diseases, right? It's very unlikely that any sponsor is going to be sufficiently effective in operating the study in a single country. In many cases, it's just impossible. You need global cooperation to be able to adequately assess. So I remember being panelist in this session last year, and one of the topics that came up was the advancement of a new cluster across key health authorities globally to maybe have some crosstalk on trying to find some common ground, because discordance is often very difficult for sponsors to navigate through in our own houses. So I'm very much aware and very much appreciate the fact that the pediatric cluster has been in place and functioning for so long. But have we gotten to a point where there is any routine exchange between health authorities on advancement of the regenerative medicine initiatives?
I can,
Yep.
I mean, I can take that. So yes, so specifically just to highlight a couple things. One, we have a new pilot that specifically is to address this issue, the Cogent pilot. where we're really looking to partner and collaborate with our EMA partners, Health Canada partners where we can, and have more of a global perspective to cell and gene therapy development. And so to your point, to have more communication across just across these programs, but internationally, so such that if we can get to a place where our sponsors are, you know, essentially submitting the same information package, and that we're all on the same page in terms of requirements. So that we're standing that pilot up now, actually, and so you'll hear a lot more probably in the next few months. But I think that there are a lot of opportunities that we currently have, in addition to this pilot, which is encompassing sort of all of the disciplines into that specific space. We do have a lot of conversation with, you know, CMC trilateral meetings and farm talks type of meetings, specific discipline meetings, but we're really looking to leverage that collaboration more, and with the hope that we're going to get more of these gene therapies to the finish line quicker, and from a more global standpoint, you know, at the same time. We're not yet at the cell space with this. We're going to start with gene, but we're going to hopefully expand it, you know, after we're able to right size it and make sure that, you know.
Great. I think that'll be very helpful for everyone in the ecosystem.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, I think this is probably going to be a question for both Nicole and for Lynne from basically FDA perspective. I wanted you to talk a little bit about, you know, your perspective of expedited programs such as breakthrough therapy and RMAT designation, and how that has been really helpful in advancing and accelerating the development of cell and gene therapy products. Or you want to, yeah.
I'll let Nicole first, sure.
So I think that so RMAT designation, breakthrough designation, these are all programs that we have at FDA. In summary, what I think they do from a regulatory standpoint, they really highlight for us where the programs where there is significant promise and where we're seeing effect, especially for breakthrough. And so it does that in that regard, but I sort of hedge with that, because in general, we really are trying to advance all programs, you know, in addition to those that have these formal designations. So I don't want to just sort of, I don't want to lose that piece of it. But for RMAT designation as well as breakthrough, those are programs that we really try and meet with sponsors. We try and, you know, answer questions as they arise. We really try and advance those programs as much as we can in the framework of additional meetings, additional communication where we can. And also we have a START pilot, which there's so many of these things, right? And so we get a lot of questions about, where does my program fit? Like, which of these programs make sense for us? And there is some overlap between some of these programs, but our START pilot is specifically for rare diseases and for rare diseases that affect patients in the morbidity and mortality in the first decade of life. And so that, again, is a program that highlights increased communication with the agency and really trying to get these programs to the finish line quicker. So we're very excited about that program. It's a program that we have both in CBER and CDER. And we have 4 programs specifically in CBER that we're working with currently, and we're looking to expand that program as well. So all of these programs really the hope is that we're expediting development in areas where there's promise, where there's significant unmet need and potential benefit. So.
Okay, great.
So part of the reason, maybe a continuation of my last question, why we need to leverage the globe for development. There's the scarcity of disease, of course, but there's only so many centers that would meet our standards to be able to even conduct these trials in, right? Given the unique safety monitoring that needs to be implemented, et cetera. So as for some of the uber rare diseases, it's been my observation that we've literally had to relocate families for a period of time. Maybe Paula, I'm wondering if you might be able to give some perspective.
Yeah.
Like, how does this work?
Yeah,
And
it is probably one of the biggest logistical hurdles. And if I can say anything, I've used this phrase a lot recently. It's like, use your runway, right? protocol, final protocol somewhere over here, here's somewhere over here. Maybe you haven't picked your CRO yet. Maybe you haven't engaged with vendors yet. Do it as early as you possibly can. For the rare pediatric space, and the younger you go, or even the more affected a patient is, you need a white glove support for these families. It's not as simple as, hey, let's hire vendor X that can support travel. It's not that simple. What assisted devices do they have? Do these families have passports? Do they need a visa? What are the origin countries' requirements? There are some countries, if you get a gene therapy treatment outside of their country, you can't go back home. What are the destination country requirements? What are the financial implications dealing with, for instance, Australia? You have to have a lot of guarantees in place. The insurance policy for the sponsor is phenomenally high. There's just a lot of planning, and I think the best approach, get all your key players in the room really early on. And the visual in my head from one of the trials that I've been supporting is literally a room, probably a quarter of the size, and we had Post-it notes around the entire room for the journey, like each touch point and each person's role, what was important, and how did we make it all into a pathway for these patients, and really make sure that once we were able to enroll that first patient, that we felt comfortable that they were going to be able to get where they needed to go, be relocated adequately. Do they need a dog sitter? Do they want to bring their dog with them? Do they need education for their other children? Do they need a rental for 2 months? Or are they going to relocate for 2 years? It also has a huge cost impact for our sponsors too. And trying to ballpark that cost is like incredibly hard. It's a huge commitment, but starting early, really start at the planning, look at the nitty gritty details, because one of those details that you don't look at is going to be the one that trips you up down the line.
Yeah, thank you. There are certain countries in the world that we've gleaned. In addition to the traditional health authority-based regulation, there'll also be a separate regulator for any and everything GMO.
Exactly. There's like multiple
Yeah.
layers. There's so many layers to things. And then even down at the institutional level, they'll have a GMO committee, or they'll also have an international patient committee. And, all these players have to get together. Something as simple as, oh, we're going to do mobile clinical to lessen the burden. And you go to an institution that's a predominant institution, and they will not accept a mobile clinical vendor. They will only allow you to use their nursing staff. Well, their nursing staff can't go to a different continent. So it's a little challenging at times.
And I want to just add here, because I think it's important. In addition to thinking through the clinical aspect of things, we really need to be thinking through the manufacturing aspect of things early. Because we've seen a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of opportunity for engagement and figuring things out early on from a manufacturing standpoint. What are the critical quality attributes of your product? What is the potency? Because life happens. So for example, we have situations where sponsors will have to switch manufacturing sites from one location in California to another one in Colorado, and not really have a true understanding of their product, such that they're able to compare across these manufacturing sites and get to a place where we know, at the end of the day, we need to know that the product that we're giving is potent, pure, safe, and all. And so I'm thinking through some of the manufacturing aspects early on is really important, so that we're not left at the end trying to figure that out. Would you mind if I continue with this? Because you're so along those lines, I wanted to touch on one of the programs that have been put in place, most specifically RMAT. And I know that there is a lot of, I think, agency interaction, and I suspect more often than not, the topic of CMC is a critically important component there. How does the agency view success or lack thereof of that program? Like, is it working? Is it doing what it was intended to do? Yeah, I mean, RMAT has been quite successful. We have in addition to the meetings that everyone is sort of accustomed to, we have RMAT specific meetings where we have a initial RMAT meeting where we really talk through a lot of these issues up front, right? And then internally, what's not always visible to the public, we have RMAT meetings. So we had an RMAT meeting yesterday where we go through each of those programs that have RMAT designation, each of those disciplines and where those programs are and where there's need. So I do that within our super office. And we have a lot of conversation across all of our reviewers, which, you know, are hundreds of reviewers right now. And so to your point, yes, I do think that that's an important program. It's a successful program, and it really has allowed us to sort of stay on top of things and sort of where there are issues. And I would always encourage sponsors, I say this every time I have the opportunity, that if there's something that is not working or you're not clear about that, please come back and talk to us. There's been a lot of innovation, a lot of change in this space in the past 5 years. And so something that, you know, was said maybe 10 years ago is different now. And so we really are wanting to progress programs and to ensure that, you know, that they're feasible, that we're able to enroll patients, that we're not getting hung up on some of the CMC questions. And so please feel free to come back to us. We really have fostered internally a space to do that. So
Great. Thank you.
I wanted to ask the same question to Lynn, because I think I missed asking you this one. And how is your office involved in all of those RMAT and breakthrough designation related discussions that perhaps primarily happen at CBER? But because this is pediatrics, I'm not sure. I don't know if you guys are also involved in that, and how do you interact?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say that it's not so much a CBER, you know, cell and gene therapy versus CDER. It's an issue of our office, who has a lot, or our division has a lot of pediatric expertise, is focused on the submissions that are required under law under pre and BPCA. And as many of you know, orphan designated products are not subject to PREA. And so we don't necessarily automatically get involved. So we will get involved, of course, and as Nicole has already described, you know, what do you think about this pediatric program? Is there a prospect of direct benefit? You know, ethical questions. So our Office of Pediatric Therapeutics, I'm looking at Anne and Melissa, and of course our new pediatric ethicist, Dahlia Feltman, who is on staff now. So we interact regularly in that regard. And it is, I think, a testament to the fact that we have built a team that is very collegial, and that the experience that we have with other groups within CDER and CBER are all very collegial. So it's not a problem to pick up the phone, to call, you know, someone on my team, for Nicole to, you know, shoot me a Teams message, or for me to shoot a message over to Nicole, or any of the reviewers in Cell and Gene.
So basically the answer to, I guess, the lesson from all of this discussion is that there's a lot of crosstalk that happens between DPMH, OPT, and CBER on all aspects related to pediatrics.
Yeah, and if I could sort of explain, you know, the evolution of that. It's not only that we have the comfort and the trust to talk to each other within FDA. I think that some of the comments that have been made earlier, Cecile, I think in the first session this morning, talked about the trust that's been developed across agencies and across regions. And by the way, not just with other regulators, but with stakeholders in industry, stakeholders in patient organizations and advocacy groups. Trust that's been built with public-private partnerships. I think that it's a model, if I could, and maybe preaching a little bit to the choir here, because a lot of you who are here now are here because they want to hear, you want to hear about, INC, you want to hear about the Neonatal Consortium. And maybe some of those neurodegenerative folks aren't in so many in the audience at this point, at this meeting. But I do think that if you want to look at a model that I think people have tried very hard over the years to create, this trust model, it's one that we have forged in pediatrics because it's been hard to get these drugs developed. And I think that if you could take something away, those of you in the audience, that INC, the International Neonatal Consortium, is filled with folks who have done the hard work and continue to do the hard work. I think that the other groups within Critical Path could maybe learn some lessons from how INC operates.
Fully agree.
Yeah.
And for the folks that are not necessarily prioritizing neonates as their patient population, but nonetheless looking at young pediatric patients, I think there's a lot of cross-fertilization to learn from INC for sure.
I wanted to continue this train of thought that you initiated, the role of public-private partnerships and how these sort of pre-competitive collaborations can really advance. I mean, we know there's already a lot of tons of evidence across therapeutic areas, non-gene therapy related therapeutic areas, but nevertheless, how do you think in FDA's perspective, industry perspective, CRO perspective, it's a question to all of you, the benefit and role of public-private partnerships in really advancing some of these challenges that you guys already talked about are really prevalent in drug development in gene therapies. Lynne already talked about it, so Amber, do you want to go next?
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think I'm going to stick with the gene therapy world that I know so well. And actually it goes beyond just what we can do for neonates. I think that there's a lot of advantage even for our, large indications, like we have a Parkinson's program as well. There's for PD specifically, just, helping, find better endpoints, for example. That's one way that I think, not only can we contribute some of the data, but I think, working, with CPAP and others, to come up and come up with better ways of measuring PD and what should we be looking at with a gene therapy intervention, for example. But I think, when it's a more obvious example maybe is with the smaller, more rare disease where we just do not have much information. We're really, walking a path that's been untrodden. And so having something like a public-private partnership, being able to look at some of the data that's being collected and then cultivated, like the CPAP is doing, this is a big advantage for us in that way too. And I think some of it's just building these relationships in this kind of informal way is also really, really critical.
It's crazy to say out loud almost that I'm now entering my 30th year in industry, and it's amazing how much has changed in that period of time. Thinking about to when I started, but I also vehemently remember this almost like philosophy that for many of the companies that I've worked for called NIH syndrome. And it has nothing to do with the National Institutes of Health, by the way, for NIH colleagues that are here. It's not invented here syndrome. And that science that was being done by others always was looked at a little bit critically kind of thing. That's changed fundamentally. And I think if you look at the innovation space within the regenerative medicine field, most of the early innovations, the invention steps, the early ideations for the program are not coming from big pharma. They're coming from the small biotechs, the academic venues, so forth and so on. That's usually where the journey begins. But at the end of the day, drugs have to get developed. And I think while I'm more than happy to leverage the expertise externally, I think for the most part, the large multinational sponsors know a thing or two about drug development and getting products over the line ultimately. So there's been a natural found waterline in some respects of how that collaboration happens. So now maybe with our two industry colleagues, how do you find that? How does that work at Lilly? To what degree do you still leverage the expertise of the innovators as your teams now are starting to move things forward? And is it working flawlessly now at this point, or room for improvement? Yeah, how would you characterize it? And then I'll ask the same question to Amber.
Yeah, no, I think it's been extremely important. I know me and my group have had tremendous appreciation for our involvement in INC, the Cell and Gene Working Group that is doing some important work, and other consortia that have working towards delivering breakthrough therapies for pediatrics. I think not only when you're talking about biomarker identification, validation, I think some of these other things that are directly targeted towards a specific disease state we may be looking at, but I feel like a lot of benefit we're deriving from it has just been from advancing the field in general. I think it was said yesterday, we understand, I think we need to think about all these separate disease states, potentially in their own rights and specifically, but in a broader scope, where are there similarities? I think that's where we found has been most helpful, is we're concentrating on certain disease states, but what are those similarities kind of across rare disease in general, whether that's lysosomal storage or certain categories of rare disease, and what are some of those shared learnings that we can take to not only ensure the success of our current programs that we may be looking at, but future programs and just advancing the field in general. And I feel like that's been a huge benefit that we've seen from it.
Yep. So while we have two industry colleagues here, I would characterize Brian's role as being a little bit more downstream. Amber is a little bit closer to the innovation, a bit more upstream. So what's been your experience in the collaborative model?
I think we have a somewhat novel model. So we're with AskBio and with Bayer. You know, AskBio, again, is kind of what you just mentioned. So we have a bunch of groups getting together that have invented. We have the original inventors in a lot of cases that are part of our programs. You know, there's that deep expertise on AAV biology and just gene delivery. I think that really sits, you know, deeply, you know, in AskBio. One of the inventors and founders of AAV therapy is part of our company. You know, beyond that, though, this is a, you know, company that's still young. I think there's a lot of growth that still needs to happen. The field itself is, you know, still quite young. And so, you know, there's some advantages to having the agility and, you know, the deep science in the biotech. But we haven't developed a drug. And in fact, there's not much, you know, expertise in spite of the successes we've had. There's not many that have been, you know, approved. And so being able to, you know, then lean on, you know, the expertise, this, you know, more established organization like Bayer, it's a nice marriage of fitting in the puzzle pieces. And I think that actually has the potential, if done well and done very intentionally up front, this actually has potential to accelerate the way that we develop these drugs. Again, taking some of the synergies and learnings from other groups, this is really how we can speed up and do better and be more efficient with what we're doing.
Very cool.
So, question to Nicole, and I think I'm going to ask the same question to Lynne after that is, knowing what you know about one of the core competencies and big strengths of critical path institute is data sharing and using integrated data to create quantitative drug development tools, like, you know, use of biomarkers, patient-reported outcome measures, and clinical trial simulation tools and whatnot, and all of the others. Are there any areas in the cell and gene therapy drug development domain that you think have critical unmet needs that can be solved by, you know, this collaborative data sharing and quantitative drug development tool approach that you might think comes right to your head that you might want to talk about? And this is a question to you, Lynne, and also Nicole, both of you guys.
Can I answer that first?
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know the answer is yes, but specific example.
Well, that's my point, which is that you name it, every single one of those, there's an opportunity for CPath and specifically INC to play a role. And I think a leading role, not just for cell and gene, although I think since we're talking cell and gene up here, I'll say, yeah, for sure for cell and gene. But again, what I really want to impress upon the folks in the room is that what we do in INC, I think, has application beyond INC and cell and gene. It has application to all of the programs that CPath has been, you know, working diligently in, because we have talked about how do you apply you know, in vitro systems, because we don't have an animal model for the cell and gene therapy for this particular disease. We've talked about how do we use real world data. We have this project of 400,000 records that you heard John Davis talk about. We've done that already in INC. You know, that's something that I think the rest of the community that's, you know, within CPath would love to have. You know, how was that created? That was not an easy effort. And, you know, I see all the folks who were involved in that nodding their heads, but we, you know, INC created the space, the funding, and the opportunity for that to be developed. I mean, I could go on about how AI will end up being used to interrogate those databases, right? How patient-focused drug development, you know, that we're leading the way there, I think, in terms of patient voice. You heard Deb, you know, is a part of our steering committee. So I think that in almost every area you've talked about, or you point out, Kanwaljit, that we are already trying to do that in INC with respect to cell and gene and with respect to all of the diseases that can affect premature infants and neonates.
Fully agree.
Anything
to add?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Lynne Yao said. I think that in terms of biomarker development specifically, there's a lot of opportunity, I will say, to move more things to a pre-competitive space and to have everybody on the same page, from an agency standpoint, it almost breaks your heart when we see the same mistakes over and over again, and what I really mean this. I wish there was more publication and knowledge sharing of failures as there is of success, because there's a lot to learn from, what didn't work or what didn't correlate or otherwise, and it doesn't always happen. From an agency perspective, we are leaning into this a lot, in that we are really looking to leverage what we do know about some of the diseases that occur in pediatrics, to have more approvals based on intermediate endpoints, or based on biomarkers, with a really robust conversation and discussion about what that trial looks like, or what that follow-up looks like for those individual patients. And a lot of the term accelerated approval. For an accelerated approval, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in terms of pediatrics, getting things to patients that have this significant unmet need sooner, but also following patients to get the data that we need. Long-term follow-up is a whole nother conversation that we really have to try and right size and fit. And in the gene therapy space, it can be challenging, actually, on both sides. We've seen challenges. I'll just say really quickly, to add to what you were saying, on one side, what we've seen is, well, I'm cured from this, I don't need to come back for follow-up. We've had investigators talk to us about that, in terms of loss to follow-up of patients. On the other side, we have, there's a lot of opportunity to figure out what we can do from an investigator standpoint, because sometimes investigators leave institutions, or programs, their sponsors that sort of run out of money, and then are no longer supporting programs. And what can we do to ensure that we're still getting the follow-up that we need? So there's a lot of opportunity in a pre-competitive space, to answer your question, to figure out some of these and think through them up front, and in less of an elbows out type of way, and more of a all arms, all hands on deck type of way.
Yep.
Got it. Yes.
Just have to say one more
Yes,
thing.
please.
Sorry. So, I think in a pre-competitive space too, as Nicole mentioned, biomarkers, you heard Peter Marks say, monogenic diseases that you're going to treat with gene therapies are tailor-made for, a biomarker endpoint, right? But I think the other piece of it that's important from the pre-competitive space that we've heard, we had a diversity workshop on Friday at FDA, and diversity in pediatric clinical trials. One of the things we heard was, to that point of like, how do we get those patients to understand that this is going to be a long-term follow-up, right? A lot of times, if there's not a community that's built, from the start in that pre-competitive space about getting the patients to understand that they are part of the development of this clinical trial, that is protocol,
Absolutely.
that gives them that gives families and patients the buy-in to say, I know that trial was built because it was important to collect these endpoints. They asked me what was important. So I know that I'm in it for 15 years because they needed me to be in it. So I think that in that pre-competitive space where you incorporate, objective endpoints, patient voice, that's the way that you create a program that will meet its objectives, even if it takes 15 years or 25 years.
Yeah, we'll to put in a plug for our workshop tomorrow. Operationalizing the long-term follow-up piece is a core area of focus. When I gave a talk last year, I highlighted that long-term follow-ups are not new to those that run pediatric clinical trials. We've been doing this for some time. But my suspicion is that anybody that has been doing this for some time, particularly with global studies, has concluded that the most challenging country to effectuate long-term follow-up is this one. So I know there's a solution here, and I share Lynne's enthusiasm that the INC team will be able to crack the nut, but it is something that we have to get ahead of because it is going to be challenging.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the clock here, and I really wanted to provide an opportunity to the audience to ask questions that they might have, because we have only like 5 minutes left. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. This was a wonderful panel. As I take care of patients with a variety of different illnesses, and sickle cell being one of them, Obviously, that was a very important study, and the prospect of a cure for sickle cell is really quite important. Many people say to me, "What took you so damn long? You've understood the biology of this disease for 20 years, and yet we've made so little progress." And I think the important thing to acknowledge, and I'd be curious to hear from the panel, how, as we develop all these new treatments, how we maintain a lens and a focus on health equity, so that everybody has the opportunity to potentially benefit from these types of treatments. So I know this is a hard one too. And yeah, I think, Tom, we will talk more tomorrow about follow-up, because I think some of the gene therapy trials with some patients developing, blood cancers and others, I think are important warning signals for all of us as we all say, let's dive in here, because with the improved diagnostics, we're picking up these kids all the time. But I'd be curious to see what people think as we're developing all these treatments, where they think, how are we going to ensure access to these treatments by all the populations that potentially could benefit.
Who wants to go first? No silver bullet answer?
Can I just
Yeah,
say, sorry, I know I'm monopolizing now, but so that may take, I think, widening the circle a little bit, because I heard, again, Dr. Marks give his thoughts at the first panel, and he talked about what does reimbursement look like if it's a single treatment and it costs a couple $1 million and that's it. How does that model look for someone who needs it in Africa who's got sickle cell, right? That's not going to work. So I think, there's a lot of smartness in this room, but maybe not the right smartness. Maybe we need to include health economists in this discussion. When I heard about, the ethical and legal challenges of intellectual property and sharing information across companies, maybe we need to have IP attorneys who are in industry part of this discussion. I heard about there was use of big data and the fact that Epic and Cerner, maybe they're not fit for purpose. Maybe we need to have people who run those systems come and be part of this meeting. So it might take a little bit of widening the circle and having, I don't know how hard the hearts are of people in Epic, but if they could hear the stories, right? If they could hear the stories about how important their systems are in creating databases that we can interrogate and use to decrease the time to get these studies over the finish line, or to collect the long-term data that we really need in an efficient way, maybe that would change their minds. I don't know, but I think that's maybe one approach.
I didn't say maybe a complementary approach, and I think it might have been you, Nicole, that touched on it earlier, is manufacturing.
Yes.
We have a massive hill to climb here. These medicines are so expensive to make, and particularly for the rare diseases, right? Because you don't need a lot of them.
Right.
You don't have the benefit of the volume of manufacturing that you might for pills. So that is a solvable problem, but I don't know if it's an immediately solvable problem versus a decade-long fix to get to that point. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I see this as a matter of time still.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, there's one over here. So, yep.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Carla Rodriguez Watson, Reagan Udall Foundation for the FDA. I wanted to follow up on David's comment. Last week, the foundation, we hosted one of our public-private partnerships. It was a partnership with the Gates Foundation where we talked about cell and gene therapies and sickle cell disease. Dr. Marks was there. A lot of the things, he echoed what you just said, David, that it would be a shame if we developed these, I can't say cure yet, but they look like it, right? And it was only accessible to people in wealthy countries. Arguably, like you just mentioned, there are the same issues in the US that existed in the developing and low and middle income countries. Importantly, I think, is sharing. We had a number of regulators from Africa, for the African countries, and from the WHO, who shared that part of the issue is manufacturing in country, right? And not having people travel for those trials, and that sharing information, that there are now 14 centers within the continent of Africa that can support doing that ex vivo kind of preparatory work. So that's part of it. But I think, as you all noted, and we have had EPIC at the table during something that we hosted called RAISE, which is the really a 11 series workshop we did to improve race and ethnicity in real world healthcare data sets. And we have an action framework. I encourage you to go to our website and get it and share it with your healthcare leadership to improve those data. It has actionable examples of how institutions have taken on this charge. But EPIC has tools also to be able to accommodate more granular categorizations of race and ethnicity that roll up to the OMB in the US, the OMB's race standards. But it's about implementing that, right? And now mapping it, because there are new standards that just came out in April. So I think that these are all issues that are really important, and particularly from a health equity lens, it's the data. We have to have clinical trials in African countries. I mean, that is what we know to be the most genetically diverse area. I think I get scared when we think about the fact that we are trying to implement AI into some of these therapies to search for valid and invalid off-target effects. So we only know what we know. If we don't collect these data, the models that we're going to build are going to be on missing. There's going to be a much larger missing data, and it's a missing data problem.
Well, I think that's, it's complex. I don't think it's one piece or another. I just want to say that. I think, you know, from a manufacturing standpoint, yes, we have to figure out ways where we can, we can decrease cost upfront and find ways. Information sharing is one where we could, I think CRISPR, there's a lot of opportunity in technologies like CRISPR where we can sort of do a bit more plug and play. I think that's what's coming. So manufacturing is one piece, but the other side of it that I also hear is this value proposition. Okay, well, what is it? What's the value if I'm able to cure your sickle cell disease and you don't have, you're normally hospitalized 4 times every month, and now you have 0. What's that value to you? And so I've seen conversations on both sides, and I think health equity, we really have to figure out, have additional conversations around both of those things, is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think
It's
that
complex, though.
value is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Exactly.
The patient will think differently than the
It is.
payer
Right.
versus the
It's
care.
complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, Cecilia, you have one quick question?
Yeah, thank
Wrap
you.
up.
Just to chime in briefly, but I completely agree with you, Carla. And I think at WHO, in the GAPF group, which is the Global Accelerator for Pediatric Formulation, there was a workshop before the summer where they really, I really pushed the discussion, like, do you want to be part of these cell and gene therapies? And they said, yes, we don't want to miss the wave. And we have an opportunity with the GAPF Accelerator and the Pediatric Regulatory Network to easily engage with WHO in an area where they are structured to have this discussion. So I think maybe it's time to connect with them on that in the next steps. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Indeed. Good
Definitely.
final word. Thank you to the panel.
you.
This went fast, so hopefully everyone felt it was an
Yeah.
engaging conversation.